It's hard for me to hear this gospel, as long as it is. It's so hard for me to hear this gospel and not think of not hear the words of the song Amazing Grace in my head. And I personally relate to I once was lost, but now I'm found more than I do. I once was blind, but now I see. I don't relate to that as much on a literal level. But on a spiritual level, I think we can all relate to it more to some degree. And on a spiritual level, I think is what John, the gospel writer, wants us to read it at. That we are to see this story, and the words that I got to it near the end, that I came that those who see may be made blind, and that those who are blind can now see. And then he says to the Pharisees, if you did not see, you wouldn't be sin. And I thought those are words that are really intriguing to me. And I think what he's talking about is something that I came across as I was preparing for this sermon, is that there are ways that we can kid ourselves not into thinking we see things as they are when we really don't. That there are ways that we sometimes convince ourselves that we can see things that we don't see, and it's in that conviction, that sense of believing that we can see things the way they really are, that sometimes blinds us. Now, I know that sounds like play on words and trickery, but I was reading a website. I tried Googling seeing in a new way, and I came across a website that was interviewing a man who is a TED Global Talk speaker, and his name, I should have brought my iPad out with me to be able to say his name, but it just left me. He started a school for kids called My School in England, and he teaches kids by showing them optical illusions and other kinds of illusions, and saying and teaches them to realize that there is more than one way to see things, that there's more than one way to look at things, and to be flexible and adaptable in the way they look at things. And he says that one of the things that keeps us from being able to see from many different perspectives is conviction. Now, a lot of people believe conviction is important, and you hear a lot of that in our culture, that stand by what you believe, stick to your guns, don't give up on what you know is right. And yet he's saying the opposite. He's saying that having too much conviction can get in the way of truly seeing, as we saw in today's gospel. And in fact, that was the problem of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were so convinced that they were right about everything, that they were the ones who saw the truth and knew all about God and everything there was to know about God, and that they were so convinced of that they weren't open to seeing God right in front of them, because God came in a form that they didn't recognize. God came in the form of a man who cured a blind man on the Sabbath of all times, and that couldn't possibly be, that God wouldn't perform a miracle on a Sabbath because of the Ten Commandments. And so he talks about, the gospel talks about they go around the neighborhood and ask over and over, was this man really blind? And they go to his parents, was he really born blind? And they don't believe that. And then they ask somebody else, and everybody's just, buzzing about it. It's big news in that area. And it's all because people refuse to see right in front of them this miracle that had happened, that somebody who had been born blind was made to see. And so there's the literal level of just seeing what happened and then there's the spiritual level of understanding why. The spiritual level of realizing that God works in our lives in a lot of different ways, and sometimes in ways we may not recognize. But what gets in the way is conviction. And I just thought that was a powerful thing, and that in fact I think one of the reasons that people sometimes get stuck in fundamentalism, which is very different from the way Episcopalians do church, although there are fundamentalist Episcopalians. But one of the things that happens is that when the world becomes more and more complex, people hunger for conviction. They want very clear-cut answers. They want things to be black and white. They want things to be simple, to go back to a simpler time than things are now. And they remember things selectively. They remember the past very selectively, to a time when everyone agreed on what was right. Remember, that idea that everybody all agreed with each other back in the good old days. And so we hunger in complex times for those times when it's simple and when it's obvious. And the other thing is that we want someone to tell us what the truth is. And that's why fundamentalist churches are booming during this time in our culture. They're the ones that are growing. And the churches that have very clear answers are doing really well. And yet, all relative to who goes to church, I should say. Not well based on the good old days of the 50s when you just opened a church door and people filled it up. But the reason for that is like I said, is that people want to have conviction about things. Churches like the Episcopal Church that have gray areas and don't try to make up our minds right away about things aren't quite as popular in these complex times. They're not places that people flock to necessarily because they aren't getting the same clear-cut, definite answers about things. And so, what happens though when we are too convicted, when we think we know, is that it keeps us from being able to see. Now, what can often change that is to have some kind of major upheaval or disruption in our lives. And probably most of you can point to a time in your life when some major event happened and it changed the way you saw things from then on. Now, it might have been, losing a job, or it might have been a kid getting in a lot of trouble and suddenly drawing attention to your family in ways that you never expected. It might have been your own illness, major illness. But from then on, things were different. You saw things in a different way. Priorities became clearer to you. and you could see good at work in the world in places that you never expected to see it. And that the whole experience, and we talk about that in Epiphany, but that is another term that we use, is seeing the light. Suddenly you see the light. And it's often very different from what you thought it was all about when you were younger, when you knew everything, right? Wouldn't you love to go back to those days when you were sure about everything, and everything just was simpler and made more sense? And during these times of upheaval, we also often open ourselves up. We say to ourselves, maybe I was wrong about other things. A friend of mine who was a colonel in the Army and was very successful, was in special forces, and now does a lot of intelligence work as a civilian. Got sober when he was in the Army and went through treatment, and he was very shocked to discover that he had this illness, this disease that he didn't believe he had, and he said to himself in his typical logical way, if I could be so wrong about this and not see it right in front of my eyes, what else am I wrong about? And that was a great place for him to be. And to this day, he's one of the most open-minded people that I know. He's one of the most curious and searching people I know. He's always he loves to uncover things and discover things. And it's just a great person to be around in a lot of ways. He's also a very grateful person. And it's obvious that there's an inner light in him that shines from inside. And so you like to be around people like that. And it all happened as a result of his being willing to open his mind and be willing to say, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. And that's such a freedom. It's a great place to be able to say, maybe not, and to not rush into judgment about things. And so this spiritual insight is another word that we use. It begins to become a part of who we are as we open ourselves up. We begin to have other insights into things. We begin to realize that there's a wisdom that's not of our own making that happens as our spiritual vision gets clearer, and it's in that spiritual insight that we begin to begin to make better decisions about things. We begin to have hunches about things that turn out to be right, and it's all about gaining this insight and this spiritual vision, this enlightenment into Christ, the light. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And as long as I'm in the world, I am the light. And I believe that light is among us, and it's in each of us. Some of us, it's much more obvious than others. And for some of us, we go through periods of discouragement and maybe cynicism and stuff, and the light kind of gets dimmed. But all it takes is being willing to say, I wonder about this. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. And being willing to see things in a new way. And then from there, we begin to open up again. But I do believe that once we see, it's hard to unsee. Once we see, it's hard, we don't forget completely. We will continue to see in a different way. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, source of all vision, source of the light, the uncreated light, open our eyes to your presence. Open our ears to your call. Open our hearts to your love. Creator, Christ, Great Spirit. Amen.